Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Halper from ICAHD, speaking from Jerusalem for my September 2025 update of what's happening in our region and what's happening with ICAHD. Uh, what I thought I'd do this morning before I get into the more political update, and I'll try to do this briefly, is to talk about ICAHD's work itself. We haven't talked about we do a lot of work. I focused more on the political every week, but I think it's important to look at what one organization. I mean, there's a lot of excellent organizations, Israeli, Palestinian. Sometimes we work together, of course. International groups that come in with solidarity work. There's really a lot of groups that are working on the ground, humanitarian groups and human rights organizations and so on. But ICAHD has been very active since 1997. And I think we define ourselves as an anti-colonial organization based in Israel, dedicated to resisting Israeli colonization and apartheid, and building a shared democracy in historic Palestine. So that includes the fact that we're an Israeli-based organization, even though we changed our name from the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and we kept ICAHD, which is a branding with the strapline I just mentioned, Israeli-based, but anti-colonial. And we changed the name, as I explained before, um, first of all, because it reflects our commitment to the one democratic state resolution of this whole thing. In one democratic state of equal rights for everyone and the return of the refugees to the whole land of historic Palestine, there is no Israel. Israel and the occupation are both replaced by one civil democracy for everyone. And so from that point of view, to continue to argue that we're an Israeli organization is in a sense going against our own conception of an Israel that's replaced by a civil democracy. And second of all, of course, with the war crimes, the genocide going on, we certainly can't be associated with that in any way. We can't give the impression by calling ourselves Israeli that somehow we see ourselves as a part of this. We're in inalterably opposed to what Israel is doing, and therefore, but nevertheless, we're based in Israel. I'm an Israeli. We're Israelis that are fighting our regime, both the genocide and the crimes against humanity and war crimes it's committing against the Palestinians, of course, but also to replace it with one civil democracy. So, as ICAHD, then for the last almost 30 years, um, we've really tried to address, even though we're a small organization, the range of political activities we have to do in order to fight Israeli colonization. And we work on different levels. I think one of the point that I always try to make is that we're a political organization. We're not humanitarian. We're not just human rights, although we, of course, support human rights and international law. Um, uh, and we're not simply protesters or activists. We try to combine our resistance, is the way I like to think of it. I try to use an anti-colonial language that I think we have to use more. Our resistance on the ground to Israeli colonization with a political analysis and political organization that will lead us toward resolving this whole thing. We can't just protest, we have to get engaged politically. And of course, ICAHD has always worked with our Palestinian partners. Um, and so I think that's also been very important. We've really pioneered in many ways work on the ground, certainly from our rebuilding activities. But also, I think we've pioneered working politically with Palestinian organizations towards a political resolution. So on the ground, of course, we began as a committee against a committee of all kinds of organizations in Israel, focused on the issue of house demolitions, which is one of the most painful parts of of the occupation and in general in the entire country of Israeli colonization since 1948, since the Nakba. Israel's demolished so far since 1948 something like 500,000 Palestinian homes. And then you can add into that businesses, mosques, churches, community centers, farms, almost the entire infrastructure of Palestinian life. Something like 300,000 or more homes have been demolished in Gaza only since October 7th, 2023. So that's been our focus. And that's given us the ability to work with Palestinians on the ground, real families, real communities, to really be there with them in the resistance, rebuilding their homes, resisting the demolition of their homes, but at the same time understanding on the ground where Israel is going, what its intents are. And that then contributes to our political analysis, which is very grounded. We've built over the years about 189 homes as joint acts of political resistance with Palestinians against the Israeli policy of demolishing Palestinian homes. Today, we have a real threat to one of the families. Our strategy has always been, I mean, we talk about the entire issue of house demolitions on our website, which is a great resource for anyone that wants to know what's happening on the ground. We have a whole section dedicated to, and we do a monthly report, an update on house demolitions. And we've, again, built 189 homes, but at the same time, we've tried to focus on a few families over all these years and stay with them because it's ongoing. It isn't that your home is demolished and your life goes back to normal the next day. The trauma continues, the struggle continues. Often, if you rebuild your whole house, it's demolished again, or you're trying to survive somewhere else. The story of the family continues. And so we've really stayed with two families in particular, the Shoamre family of Anata, which is near Jerusalem, and the Jabbar family, an extended family, in the Baca Valley, which is very near Hebron, which is really threatened by this massive Kiryat Arba settlement. And that's the threat today. Yesterday, the Israeli army went to all the homes in the entire valley, which is one of the most productive agricultural valleys and areas in Palestine, and took pictures of all the houses, took pictures of all the people in the houses, all the residents in that whole area, their identity cards, and left. No explanation why, but I can't believe that in this push to massively settle, that Israel, especially with Smotrich, Bezalel Smotrich, who's de facto the governor of the West Bank, I can't believe the Kiryat Arba settlement is not going to expand into this whole valley. They're drying up the valley. Mekorot, the Israeli water company, has closed all the water to the valley. And so the Jabbar family that we focused on is struggling with that today. Any day, their homes could be demolished. And so we're trying to highlight that. We've actually done a film on Atta Jabbar and his family that was on Al Jazeera. You can look it up. It's called Rooted, Rooted, Rooted in the West Bank. And you can watch it on YouTube if you'd like. We're trying now to raise funds to make it into a feature film. At the same time, we also have what we call the Sumud Project to help Palestinians stay on the land. It's very hard for us to rebuild these days. We used to have camps, and dozens of volunteers would come from all over the world to join with us to build a Palestinian home. You can't do that anymore. The suppression is much too great for any of those kinds of actions, but we do projects to keep Palestinians on their land, especially on their agricultural land, building small agricultural structures for them, as we've done for example, in Beit Umar, in order that the farmers can have more of a presence in their fields and be there, because there's always the settlers coming in and trying to grab their lands when they're not there. So those kinds of works on the ground we continue to do. Now, at the same time, of course, again, we're learning what Israel's intentions are, what's happening on the ground, what we're able to inform people about the progress of the colonization process, of the Judaization of Palestine. And we translate that into all kinds of resources that people can use in their education and advocacy for Palestinian rights. Again, look at our website. It's a great source of all kinds of resources, including maps, but articles and analyses. And this, I think, is where the political part comes in. We try to take what's happening on the ground and not only report on the terrible things that are going on, demolitions and whatever, but to put it within a framework, an analysis, so people understand what this means. How is this all contributing to the Judaization project of Israel and Zionism? I do speaking tours, and we have other ICAHD people that go out on speaking tours. We do a lot of webinars, of course, a lot of work with the public. I'm engaged in 3 tribunals on Gaza. One, the International Gaza Tribunal that Richard Falk and others have convened. We had just had a meeting in Sarajevo. We're having a meeting in Istanbul, the final verdict meeting in the end of October. I just gave testimony to the Gaza Tribunal that Jeremy Corbyn convened in London, and I'm giving testimony in The Hague next month to what's called the People's Tribunal against Benjamin Netanyahu. So all those kinds of international activities that try to bring out these issues in as dramatic a way as possible, we work with. And one really important thing that you could all participate in, Palestinians feel isolated. They need not just solidarity in terms of marches, which is important and good. They need people to come here. And so ICAHD does, we do study tours, 2 study tours every year. Our next study tour is November 10th to the 20th. And they're excellent. You go out not only into the West Bank and East Jerusalem, of course, but also into the Palestinian community of Israel itself, right? And you see what's happening on the ground. You spend a lot of time in Palestinian communities that are struggling for their existence. You're meeting not only political people, but you're meeting families as well. Palestinians and Israelis from all walks of life. It's a wonderful way to really get a sense of what's happening. You're really embedded in the situation. You learn a lot and come home prepared for much more effective advocacy, and you've expressed real meaningful solidarity with the Palestinians. So I would look at our website, ICAHD, ICAHD.org, and you can see the information and join the study tours. If you really want really political involvement and engagement, that's one of the ways to do it. And then finally, on a even a higher level, then we do not just the work on the ground, the resistance work, the advocacy work, but also the political work. We can't lose focus, on the political. We can be pulled understandably into humanitarian directions. We can be pulled understandably into activism and protest and so on, but we've got to keep a focus on the political as well. So ICAHD is a member of the One Democratic State campaign, which is a Palestinian-led organization that's formulated for the first time a detailed 10-point political program about what one democratic state would look like in historic Palestine. You can look at the ODSC website, which is onestatecampaign.org, and see the manifesto. We're also engaged in launching a campaign against normalizing Israeli apartheid, which relates to this whole process of finishing the project of Judaizing Palestine and normalizing it through the Abraham Accords. This is really, I think, the political issue of the moment. And in all kinds of other ways, we're engaged, like with the Gaza Tribunals and others, in this political work of keeping the focus on how do we end the Zionist colonial enterprise. So that's what ICAHD does. I thought it would be good to give you a picture of what one organization does. It's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, we do so much more, but I can't go on too much longer because I want to take another couple minutes, if I can, and really begin and give a certain update in terms of where we are politically. And I want to say two things, two parts of this update that I think are important. There's so much happening. First of all, the first thing I want to talk about is Gaza, of course, and you know, everybody is asking the question, why is this continuing? You know, the Israeli army says we've beaten Hamas. The Israeli army is against the conquest of Gaza City and the rest of Gaza, what Netanyahu and the government have decided to do. The Israeli public is up in arms because this means sacrificing the hostages, of course. And not only that, but the army says more than 100 soldiers will be killed in the reconquest of Gaza. So that becomes a factor. In other words, Israelis are concerned about themselves, but nevertheless, there's tremendous opposition to the war continuing. Israel is becoming a pariah state in the world over this. The genocide continues, and so on. So the question is, why is Netanyahu continuing this? Now, one level of answer, of course, which is true, is for his own political reasons. You know, his own political support, the survival of his coalition. If Ben Gvir and Smotrich on the right wing leave his government, it could be in jeopardy. He's on trial, so he doesn't want to risk not being prime minister and being then vulnerable for conviction in jail. He's and he's a narcissist. He only cares about himself. He doesn't care about the hostages, certainly not about the Palestinians in Gaza. All those are true. But there's something important here we have to understand, that again, we need this settler colonial framework to understand what Israel is doing, why is it doing it, and where is this whole thing going. And we're talking about the Judaization of Palestine, transforming an Arab country into a Jewish country. And to do that, you have to eliminate the indigenous presence altogether. We can't eliminate every Palestinian, although genocide is built into settler colonialism, but we have to eliminate, the settlers have to eliminate, not we, the settlers have to eliminate not only the ability of the indigenous to resist, you have to break the resistance, but you have to erase even their presence in the country in order to truly, in quotes, transform Palestine into Israel, into a Jewish country, where nobody thinks about Palestinians, and when you come here, there's nothing Palestinian here. And that's where the idea of total victory that Netanyahu talks about in Gaza becomes important. We can't ignore actually what Netanyahu is saying. For everything else, he's very bright, and he gets it politically, and he understands the settler colonial project. He doesn't use that language, but he knows the importance of the Abraham Accords, of normalization, of the need to pacify the Palestinian resistance, to break the resistance altogether, and to erase any Palestinian presence, okay? So that when he talks about total victory, and he talks about destroying Hamas absolutely, not only in Gaza, but this is happening in the West Bank as well, especially in the refugee camps in the north. People are saying, well, that's ridiculous. There is no such thing as total victory. You know, even the army says we beat Hamas. Why? Because in this framework, if there's one Hamas fighter that remains, if there's even a hint of resistance that remains, that means that there's a Palestinian presence. There's a presence of resistance, and that has to be absolutely eliminated. And that, I think, is a reason why Netanyahu is continuing in Gaza. He's very much alone. You know, everybody in Israel and internationally are against him, but he understands that Judaization and normalization are not going to happen unless you absolutely destroy any Palestinian resistance and then go on to erase their presence completely in the country. So that, I want to submit to you, is the reason why Israel is going on, even though it seems to make no sense militarily and even politically. It does, if you're looking at ending, successfully concluding a settler colonial project. The second thing I want to say really quickly, and this is going on long, I know, is that on September 23rd, which is coming up, there's going to be a meeting in the UN in Geneva, because the United States canceled the visas of the Palestinian delegation, a meeting on reaffirming the two-state solution. And a number of European states are probably going to recognize a Palestinian state. And this is really a danger. It sounds like a good thing, recognizing a Palestinian state, but we have to understand that if we recognize a Palestinian state without borders, we're really normalizing, so-called in the name of supporting the Palestinians, we're really normalizing apartheid, because Palestinian independence or sovereignty or the idea of a state is great, but unless there are borders, unless there are certain conditions that are met, it simply creates an apartheid situation. A state can be anything. You know, South Africa called these little Bantustans that they built for black people in South Africa, like Transkei, for example. Transkei was a state. All the Bantustans that South Africa created on 11% of its land were all supposed to be states with presidents and prime ministers and chiefs. The international community did not recognize them. And so that whole plan failed and apartheid fell, right? It was unsustainable. It was clear that this was apartheid. The danger here is that the international community, and this is the danger of the September 23rd meeting, will recognize the Bantustan that Israel is building for the Palestinians. Now, we've always said that Israel is going to take over 85% of Palestine. 78% has already been taken. That's the state of Israel that's recognized internationally. And if you add Area C, which is 62% of the West Bank where the settlers are, and East Jerusalem, you get to about 85% of Israel, leaving 15% in these little enclaves of what are called areas A, B, and whatever is left of Gaza, to be a Palestinian state. So this is more than apartheid. In South Africa, the whites controlled 89%. Here we were talking about 85%. But just this week, Bezalel Smotrich, who is the deputy minister of defense, and he's responsible for the civil administration that administers the West Bank and a lot of Gaza. You know, it administers the occupied territory, put out a map, an official Israeli government map, showing that Israel will take 82% of the West Bank, not 62% of Area C, 82%. In other words, Israel will expand to more than 90% of historic Palestine, more than we even predicted. And the Palestinians will be restricted, according to Smotrich's map, to the cities. It'll be Tulkarm Island, Nablus Island, Qalqilia Island, Jenin Island, Ramallah, Hebron, Bethlehem, Yatta, and so on. The urban centers, Jericho, will be Palestinian in a so-called state. And this is super-apartheid, because there's no sovereignty, obviously. There's no borders with an Arab country. There's nothing economically viable. These are actually prison cells. But, and here's the danger, and on this I'm going to conclude, if you have the UN meeting and the international community says we recognize a Palestinian state, but doesn't delineate the borders of a genuine Palestinian sovereign viable state, these four islands could be the Palestinian state with Gaza, right? And so apartheid is really in front of us. So I'm trying. All right, there's so much to say, but I'm going to leave it at that. I urge you all, and I hope I've piqued some interest, to join ICAHD. Look at our website, ICAHD.org. Join us. Certainly subscribe to our newsletter, which gives much more information and analysis than I can do here. Join our study tours, okay? And I'll see you next month. Let's have a productive political month, okay? Bye.